I think we can all agree that inside raid, one of the most important stats that you can build on your champions is going to be, of course, speed. So I'm here to show you some champions today that can actually make that role a little bit easier. And this isn't going to be your classic turn meter boosters or increased speed champions. This is actually going to be the opposite. This is going to be a showcase of some of the decreased speed champions that we have in the game. And why I think this is important to highlight is because, first of all, there's not many of these champions which are free to play friendly, and second of all, there's an obscenely low number of rares and epics that can actually bring this to the game. So I'm going to highlight some of the legendaries, of course, to start, but then also some of the rares and epics later on that can actually place this decreased speed for you. Why is decreased speed important? Well, because almost every single enemy in the game is susceptible to it, apart from some very specific bosses, like Clan Boss, for example. But in almost every other area of the game, it's a 30% reduction to the speed of whichever enemies you're facing, which is going to go a long ways into helping you speed tune teams, as well as meet certain gear thresholds for certain areas of the game. And I would say that, combined with an increased speed on your champions, is one of the best combinations you can have to help yourself out in this game, especially considering how many ignored defense champions we have. It used to be that decreased speed and decreased defense were very prevalent, but I think increased speed and decreased speed are kind of the new meta, especially in places like the arena, right? So we'll go over that, and I'll cover the use cases for some of these champions as well. One of the first champions I want to cover is actually the fusion that we had recently. I was kind of meh on this champion when she was announced, but after actually playtesting her and seeing the damage she can do, let alone anything else, she is absolutely fantastic, and I think her reviews are definitely reflecting that. This is a very good champion. This was our Easter fusion here in 2024. A3 is not the skill that we're here for, but it's going to place an increased speed buff and an increased attack buff on all allies for 3 turns, then fills the turn meters of all allies by 15%, and also grants an extra turn. This is on a 4-turn cooldown. Her A2 attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked of placing the big version of decreased speed and a weaken, and she's going to decrease the turn meters of all enemies by 15%. So this champion is actually pretty damn insane because she's bringing the weaken, which helps you inflict more damage, and if you already have champions that are ignoring defense, there you go, you're good to go. She's bringing increased speed, turn meter fill, decreased speed on the enemy, and turn meter reduction, which is just everything you want in a champion. On top of that, she's also increasing your speed in arena battles by 28%. And she has a passive that heals everybody when their turn meter is increased as well. So right now in arena, just to give you guys a little bit of game here, I'm picking this champion along with Arbiter if I pick second and the other team has picked an Armands. Basically, to beat Armands, you go speed into speed, which is a very effective way of doing it. And then I'll combine that with like a Crixia and 2 nukers or something like that. A little bit of a tip for you if you're ever facing me. That's probably what I'm going to do because I'm very predictable. The next champion I want to talk about is a champion that I also use quite often inside the Hydra, basically every single rotation, and that is Nekmothar. So Nekmo on his A3 has an increased speed, fills the turn meter by 30%, then gets an extra turn. Then he has a decreased speed and a leech on an AoE, so very similar, probably the smaller brother of somebody like an Eostra Dreamsong, right? His passive is going to fill his own turn meter by 5% each time a debuff or on an enemy is removed, transferred, or expires. And then he has an AoE decreased attack on the A1. So if you manage to get lucky enough and pull a Nekmo, he is an absolutely fantastic champion as well. As you can see by the reviews, everybody likes him pretty much everywhere in the game, and I think that is definitely very well deserved. Next champion up is actually going to be a free-to-play friendly champion, even though it's a Void Legendary. So this is going to be Vizix the Unbowed, who used to be an absolutely just terrible, horrific champion in the game. But then she actually did receive a buff, and her multipliers got a little bit better, I believe, as well as some other stuff. So she's now a very viable champion inside raid. Her A1, attacking somebody, taking their turn meter, AoE provoke for 1 turn, and then a shield on herself for 2 turns as well. She's doing damage based on defense, so basically as you're building her for tankiness, you're also doing more damage. She has an AoE decreased speed and an ally protection on the same skill, damage based on defense, and she is a Void Legendary, so you don't need to worry about affinities or anything like that. She can just place it no matter what. Very solid champion if you're looking for the decreased speed there. And the last of the legendaries is actually going to be one of my most wanted champions, and actually my profile picture as well. That is, of course, going to be Gwendolyn the Silent. I definitely want this champion. I think she looks badass. A2 attacks all enemies, 75% chance of placing the big version of decreased speed and a leech. and she's also placing a decreased accuracy on enemies under 2 or more debuffs for 2 turns. I think this is absolutely fantastic. This champion is very, very good in my opinion, and the reviews, of course, do reflect that as well. I am just going to say as well, there's obviously some amazing champions that didn't make it into this list. So for example, somebody like a Krisk is a fantastic decreased speed champion, but these are just my favorite champions. And I also did kind of rank it based on, you know, how accessible they are. Because I would say people getting an Easter Dream Song is a lot more viable, or a lot more realistic, or a lot more low spender friendly, as opposed to somebody pulling a Krisk, because that requires a lot of luck, or cheddar. You know, you could just use your wallet too if you wanted to. But moving on, we have some of the epics. So first stop is actually going to be Undead Hordes for 2 different champions. Both of these gals were actually in the thumbnail. First one is probably going to shock you and give you a heart attack just to hear her mentioned, and that's going to be Dark Aethel. What does she do? On her AoE, on the A2, she attacks all enemies, 75% chance of placing the big version of decreased speed. This is on a 4-turn cooldown. On her A3, though, she does have an increased speed on herself if it kills 4 or more enemies, healing her, blah, blah, blah. Basically, if this kills 10 or more enemies, she gets an extra turn, so then she can come into the AoE. Very useful for somewhere like, for example, Spider's Den, right? You could open up with this AoE decreased speed. Then when she cycles back around, which will be easier because they have decreased speed, she can then kill everybody basically, right? Because they've already been softened. Then she gets an extra turn, which reduces the cooldown of this even further, which is quite nice. And the next champion is going to be Dark Elhain. This champion is actually very much loved in the game, I think, in terms of epics. She's one of the better dark versions of the epics that we have. Attacks one enemy, destroying the target's max HP by 30% of the damage inflicted. Not very good for Scarab King, if that's what you're thinking. I tried her. Then, on her A2, however, she places a 50% increased attack on herself for 2 turns, so self-buffing. Attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a decreased speed for 2 turns. This might sound like Dark Aethel, but different. What makes her different? Well, it's going to be her passive. So whenever she has a freeze attempted to be placed on her or an ally, it's going to fill her turn meter by 25% and instantly activate her A2. So anytime an enemy, or anytime anytime an enemy tries to place a freeze on you or your teammate, she's going to instantly activate her nuke. This is obviously very, very good for somewhere like the Ice Golem, where they're continuously trying to freeze you. It's very good for the Frost Spider. She basically just makes your team immune to any sort of freeze debuffs. And it is incredible for the arena if you're going against a Tormund, because whenever he tries to freeze you, she's just going to say, you know what? Nope, I'm stripping that off and I am blasting back some damage your way. So not only is she damaging you, she is, of course, also placing that decreased speed. The only shame is that this is, of course, on a 1-turn cooldown, so once she uses this effect, it's gone, right? Instantly remove any freeze debuffs from this champion and replace them with an increased crit rate, crit damage, and a strengthen whenever somebody places a freeze on her. So she's essentially bringing increased crit rate, crit damage, and strengthen, as well as increased attack for herself. She is a fantastic epic champion. I might have to do a full-on review on her at some point. Next up, I think we actually stay inside the Dark Elves. Yes, we do. We have Sylar. So she has a decreased speed debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, then decreases the turn meters of all enemies by 40%. That's almost a half turn meter reduction on an AoE. The only champion that really outdoes her in terms of turn meter reduction is, of course, going to be Armand's, but he's ridiculous, so we don't talk about him. AoE, 80% chance, books to 100 of placing a decreased accuracy, and in an AoE A1 as well, so she's absolutely fantastic in something like a stun set if you can build her in it. Next up, we're coming over here to the Demon Spawn, and some of you might know this one. She's been in the game forever. I think she is actually a free login champion as well. She does have a decreased speed technically, so basically she attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance, if I can do my math, I can, of placing a decreased speed on the target for 2 turns. Has a 100% chance instead of placing a decreased speed debuff on all enemies for 2 turns instead if this attack is critical. So she can place the decreased speed out there. She's decreasing the damage that all of your allies receive. So she's a very, very good champion overall. She doesn't really bring a whole lot apart from that though. She definitely does have, a little bit of healing on the A1 and stuff like that as well. The reviews are okay on her. She's an epic champion that doesn't really do a whole lot apart from a little bit of ally protection and some decreased speed. But if you don't have any other options, she might be a good way to go. Last up for the last epic here. Not last up overall, just last epic. A champion I don't have quite yet. White Dryad Nia is on her A3. Just kidding. I don't know where it is actually. It's on the A1. Can you tell I don't have this champion? She attacks all enemies, 50% chance of placing the big version of decreased speed for 2 turns, which, considering the rest of her kit, this is actually fantastic. She is basically helping to reduce cooldown. She's placing strengthen, ally protection. She's, healing everybody else. She is an insane champion, and I definitely wish that I had her. So White Dryad Nia, if you have her, she might be a very, very good way to look as well for the decreased speed. And last up, we are, of course, actually going to do a mention on some of the rare champions as well. And we are once again back inside the Dark Elves because they have all the decreased speed champions, it would seem. And we are talking about Judge, this rare champion who actually has some decent reviews. His passive is how he's placing it. So with each hit, he has a 30% chance of placing a decreased accuracy, decreased speed, decreased attack, or decreased defense for 1 turn. On his A2, he attacks all enemies 2 times, fills turn meter by 10% for each critical hit. If you're going somewhere in spiders, you can cycle those turns quite easily. And then he attacks 1 enemy on AA1, damage increasing by 10% for each debuff on the target. This guy's very good in the stun set. He isn't very consistent in terms of placing the decreased speed because while it is technically an AoE, you also have to contend with 4 other potential debuffs that he could be placing. So if you get very unlucky and you don't place the decreased speed, you might still have a good debuff though, like a decreased accuracy or attack or something like that. So a very, very good champion, very serviceable, I would say. And the last champion is going to be in the High Elves, actually, which is another rare here. So this is going to be Prosecutor, if I can find her. There we go. This champion, on her A2, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing the big version of decreased speed. So this is basically on par with some of the epics that we've seen there in Dark Aethel and Dark Elhain. I would say this is actually better than Dark Aethel because it's on a lower cooldown and it's the same application rate. And not only that, but she also has a heal reduction and an increased accuracy on there. And then the A1 has a chance of decreasing the target's turn meter. So she's going to be fantastic for progressing somewhere like Fire Knight, as you can see here. People definitely agree. Very serviceable rare as well, I would say, overall. That being said, though, do you guys think I snubbed anyone on this list? Who would you like to see? Is there a champion that you use that I maybe didn't mention or you don't see anybody else in the community talking about? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys all so much for the support on the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.